All arrows point to vision. Everything points to vision. So if you get one of these central themes wrong, the chances are your project, your organization is in major trouble. So vision is one of those centrality type issues. It always comes back to that. What are we doing? Why are we here? They really struggle to define clearly what is it that we're making.
Ever been on a team that was working super hard but no one seemed to know what the game was? Have you ever seen a studio where multiple senior leaders had very different ideas of what the final product should be? Ever been given a presentation on what a game is all about only to walk away without knowing what all that meant? The word vision in game dev is used a lot. It can refer to many different things. It's intended to help studios align and focus on making the same game. Sometimes it helps. Many times it either fails to provide value, adds confusion, or doesn't even exist. This is one of the biggest problems I see in game development. And entirely independently of me, our guest, Dr. Graham McAllister, has spotted the same thing and also sees it as one of the biggest problems studios face. So today we're going to be talking about vision in game development. First though, I just wanted to give Graham a moment to introduce himself and talk about what he's seeing in the industry today. Graham, welcome.
Ben, good to meet you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Graham. I work on the problem of team alignment, in particular, the team's alignment on their game's vision. And I've been working on that problem, that one single problem, for 5 years. And why I do that is, as you were suggesting, Ben, that I believe it is probably the single most important problem that teams are facing. There's maybe one thing above it, and we'll maybe get to that in the chat. But all the evidence says the team's alignment on their game's vision is the thing that is the leading predictor of them succeeding or failing. We could define success or failure. It doesn't mean like commercial success or anything. That's another thing on top, but just them getting the job done. That's what I do. I'm an organizational psychologist. So the branch of science we are in when we look at vision or team alignment or struggles in organizations or studios closing or friction on teams, all of that stuff comes under the umbrella of organizational psychology. What is that team doing and what results do they get? So when I look at the gaming news, you ask me a question like, what do I see? I think it's important for your viewers, listeners, to understand that that's the lens I'm looking at here.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
So yesterday, when I collect these stories, we had Paradox Interactive announced that a game was, being shuttered. And the reason seemed to be that they didn't know what it was. And for them to realize that game, it would have taken too long. It would have been so far down the line that it basically didn't add up for them. And then today they said, actually, it's not just the game that's being shuttered or being cancelled, the whole studio is being closed because it's a one-game studio. So this is not an isolated case, right? This is another week goes by where the team's alignment on their game's vision trips them up to such an extent that the game is being cancelled, and in this case, the studio is being closed. And that sums up the reason why I work on this problem. That there's this idea of centrality in organizations, which is there's all these ideas floating around an organization, but some things are more central than others, right? There's some things all the arrows point to. And vision, whenever you look at the research behind vision, it is a central theme. Like all arrows point to vision. Everything points to vision. So if you get one of these central themes wrong or you have problems with it, the chances are your project, your organization is in major trouble. So vision is one of those centrality type issues. It always comes back to that. What are we doing? Why are we here? But again, all the research would say, I guess we're going to get into it, they really struggle to define clearly what is it that we're making.
Yes. Well, I think I bet there's people in some of these studios, because like you said, not an isolated incident, who would come and say, no, we had a really clear vision. Inside our studio, we knew what the game was, we knew this, that, the other. But you're pointing out that, yeah, but if your publisher didn't, one, I don't know if that's true that you did internally, but two, even if you did, if your publisher didn't, if they couldn't buy into it, if you couldn't explain it.
Exactly that.
It's for them, you become a liability rather than an asset.
Oh, we're getting into the detail already. So a spoiler alert, there are multiple visions or subvisions. We can call them different names. So you've got creative vision. What game are we making? And that's usually what the team are worried about most. Like, what are we making? Yeah. But you mentioned publisher, right? Or co-dev or VCs or basically some other external. But publishers in particular, usually they're giving you a sum of money to make a game because they want a return on that thing, right?
Yep.
So they have a vision too, but they're not so interested in the creative vision. They maybe have a more product-oriented vision, like some sort of positioning in the market. And here's the one thing I would say. You began by asking, what am I seeing in the industry? And I say, well, studios are closing because of lack of vision. Here's the other problem that's coming up more and more, and it's the friction between the two visions. The idea that, oh, we'll just make a good game and they will come is not true.
Yeah.
Because in most cases, you have someone paying for it and they want to see that that game is not just a good game, but there's enough of an audience for that game to get a return that they want. And that's a product vision. Working on vision alignment is you've got this conflict of you're meant to be on one team. Someone's going to make the game and someone's going to sell the game. Ideally, you should be one team.
Yep.
We're not one team. We have constant friction. And games are being cancelled and shuttered because one side has a greater force on the other. Usually the people with the money have more force than the people who make the game. The force being exerted. This is going to be a rambling talk, but people, I think it's worth engaging in. So they got this idea, going back a bit, of organizational flux. We used to be stable. 1980, and making games for people like you, stick to the art, make what you want. And then the money comes in. And then you got this conflict. And usually when an organization changes, you need something to stabilize it again. So you let go of something that didn't work. You decide what changes you want to make. Then you make the change and you fix it again. And the organization goes back to stability. This is the oldest model of organizational change. It's called CATS. Change is 3 steps. You unfreeze, let go of some stuff that doesn't work. You figure out what you're going to add or change in your company, and you freeze it again. So your 3 main steps. Unfreeze, make the change, put it into action, and then lock it down and freeze it. And that brings you stability.
Yep.
We don't have stability in the game industry. As the evidence, you put up the news page and someone's closing or games are being cancelled. I mean, take your pick. Do we talk about Hyenas? Do we talk about Suicide Squad? Do we talk about the Paradox game yesterday? Do we talk about State of Decay 3? Do we talk about Anthem? I mean, which one are we going to talk about here? This is a long history of these same problems. And they're all related to the friction between why do we not know what we're making? What are the forces at play that's leading to this happening? The easy answer would be to say it's all about creative. The creative team don't know what they're making. Let's just fix that.
Yeah.
But hey, hold on a second. That's not the full picture. There's a force being exerted from the people making the money. Mm-hmm. We have to talk about that too, the product vision. And I think the game industry hasn't been able to stabilize again, the third step in change's 3 steps. Because to do that, you need a solution that says, here's what we're implementing to create the stability. And they're still in the flux. They're still in the friction of these two. Is it money? Is it creative? Is it money? Is it creative? Is it money? Is it creative? And the force of one is greater than the other one, usually.
Yeah.
And
that means that the one with the greater force to apply gets to choose the change to some extent.
Yeah, usually. So this is the slider. So that's the sort of spicing it up a bit and saying, we don't have stability, but it's kind of our own making.
Yeah.
In a way. But I think, bringing it back to the topic of this conversation, this has went far deeper than I would expect.
No worries, I love it.
Well, what I think is, again, so I'm working on this thing I'm working on this vision alignment problem. And I'm trying to unify both visions, right? My solution would say the product and the game are the same. So when I interview game developers, I speak to game developers and I ask them, how do you think about your game? And generally speaking, some of them only talk about the creative. Well, here's the game, blah, 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 blah. Here's the details. Some of them only talk about the market and the player, like the business side. And some of them, but not all of them, talk about both. Well, it's both. So you can see this fracture happening all across the industry. So no one person's seeing the full picture. And when you look at how well they see the picture, it's not, I'll be polite and say it's not complete. In other words, they cannot join very well the game to the market. It's a very disjointed picture. Again, I think we'll get into the details of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's stopping them reaching the stability. And then for me to notch my slider up one more notch, my hope and my wildest dreams would be that the model that I would show would bring the stability. It would give an answer to the third step to say, actually, this friction that we're seeing between business and creative, I think they're the same problem. And here's my model to explain that. And if you look at it that way, I think this friction could be diminished. I don't want to say go away. I don't want to oversell it too much. But I think it could be diminished, right? I think they're the same problem if you look at it in a certain way, but you haven't been looking at it that way. And I think if you do that, we could reach the third step in the change. We could reach building stable long-term studios where we don't have vision shuttering a studio as we have on a weekly or monthly basis for the last 5+ years, right?
Yeah.
So that was a long intro.
I love
right?
it.
It's basically saying.
So
okay,
so you know what? Since we're already in there, I wanted to kick us off with a question, because you're talking a lot about how vision relates to everything today in our industry and the different visions that exist in that sort of stuff. What got you interested in vision in game dev?
So I was at a role previously in the games industry where I spoke to lots of studios, very large number of studios per year, hundreds probably. And I was not there to talk about vision alignment or anything. It was closer to player psychology than team psychology. But when I was visiting a studio, I would ask them, hey, what game are you making? Or who's the audience? Like questions like that. And I realized if I was walking around the studio, maybe speaking to a creative director or a producer or a programmer or an artist, I would get different answers. Now, I wasn't there to do team alignment again, just to stress that. But I came away thinking, isn't that interesting that I get different answers to what game they're making? Why isn't it the same answer? That's fascinating. Like I'm an ex-scientist, right? Still am, I guess, to some extent. So I'm interested in these problems, which is why aren't people having this? What is leading to the variation in answers? So at the start of 2019, I thought there must be a solution for that. I will go and look for that solution. So I looked pretty hard for that solution. Again, I'm 5 years in. I only answer one question, right? So I looked pretty hard to say, well, what do we know about the science of variation in thought? So if I ask someone a question and they're on the same team but give a different answer, what is that thing? What's going on in the brain specifically that leads to that happening? So first of all, I found nobody in the game industry with a solution to that. I mean, they all said they had a solution. Like, how do you do team alignment? Oh, yeah, we've got stand-ups. We have it on the wall. We have insert solution here, Tower of Wands, blah, blah, blah. There's all sorts. Do they work? Oh, no, they don't work. We're completely, it's all over them. So nobody had a solution that they were confident in working. And anybody who was confident, it was usually only in something visual or tangible. In other words, we're aligned on the art because you can point to the thing and go, that's the thing we're making.
Needs to match this style. Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever some people who said, oh yeah, we're definitely aligned, what they really meant was on something tangible, like a feature set or something you can point to. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm spoiling part of the solution here, but I'll just park that there. So I find that interesting that, okay, there's no solution for that. And when we look into this branch of science, it's called mental models. So a mental model is what you have in your head about how you think something works, how you think your television works, or your toaster or your car. You've got a mental model for how that operates. I want a signal left, I'll push the lever down, or up if you're in the US, I guess, whatever. And, I will go this direction. That's your model of how things work. So you've got that for everything in life, because if you didn't have that, you couldn't function. You can't have an accurate model. It's a simplification of the real world, right? If you had a model of actually a car worked down to the wiring and how the overload in your brain would be so great you couldn't get out of bed. It would just be too demanding. So we carry these simplifications in our head of how stuff works. And we do it for games. So a shared mental model is how you think something works. A shared mental model is what the team thinks. What do we all think about something? How do we think, the coffee machine works in the cafeteria, whatever. Now you bring that into a game. You can see the problems already, right? The difference between something functional. How does the coffee machine work in the cafeteria compared to what game are we making? A game is not quite the same as those things. It's got this hidden layer, essentially. Something you can't point to, which is the experience. And so that creates a somewhat unique problem for video games that is not similar to other aspects of design, where we're making a website or a car or whatever, right? It's mainly in the tangible. Ours is largely in the intangible. We make physical stuff, but digital stuff. We make the tangible stuff, but it's only there to serve the intangible. It's only there to create the experience, right?
Yeah.
So yes, my game has skill trees and progression systems and combat and vehicles and customization. It's got that, but that's not why people are playing it. They're playing the game for the feeling that stuff gives them. So the feeling is the core reason why we're in this business. That's the reason we're here. That's why we play games. That's why we make games, to design new experiences. So as we're talking in June, 2024, I'm in the middle of analyzing my results from the latest bit of research where I interviewed game developers worldwide to understand their mental models of how they think about games. We're all over the place already here, right? But so I said there was no solution. So rewind 5 years, I designed a solution, not knowing what branch of science I was in. I just did it, right? Created one. And then, I know, not the way to do it. And then I realized by speaking to a professor that I was in the branch of organizational psychology. So I went back and studied organizational psychology to figure out what I was missing, right? So this is the way it kind of worked. But I went back to figure out what was missing, and I added the rigor behind the model. Because when I looked at all the models that people are showing me of how they're trying to do vision alignment, there's no rigor behind it. It's like someone had an idea and they're like, well, this is how I think of games. What's wrong with that? It's like, well, it doesn't work. That's what's wrong with it. It's incomplete, I think we'll get to the detail here, but
yeah. Well, actually, so let's dive into that. What the question I had written, but I kind of want to now reword it slightly. Was what does vision mean? What if I instead ask, what do people think vision means, and what do you think vision means?
I think there's no standard answer. It's a bit like culture. There's no standard answer of these types of things. I think vision so. I think it's okay for us to have a rambling talk. I'm sure people are listening thinking we haven't finished those previous conversations. I think everything will look back eventually. So vision is a word normally used by the business-oriented half of this discussion, right? So if you read like Jim Collins and Porras's work on vision, they will divide it into two, and they will say something like, well, a vision has to have it's a future state. It's an imagined future state of where you want to go, which is how most people probably imagine it. But the second part is they say it has to be motivating. Because if I say we're going to build a new match 3. Well, what's new about it? Well, there's nothing new. It's just the same. That's not motivating. It's a vision. We're going to build it, but it's not going to motivate a team to want to get out of bed and do that, right? So you've already got this idea that if you're going to bring something onto the market, you have to imagine what it is, but it also has to be exciting enough to bring a group of people with you to do that thing, right? So that's how the business people usually talk about vision. It's some future state that we're going to go there. We're going to do that direction, The science bit of it, the organizational psychology, would call it shared mental models. Let's look back to the other thing, which is how would you describe that future state? And so we're getting into the detail, which is most people would say a vision has to be clear. There's properties of a vision. And NASA have come up with properties of the vision. Jim Collins has properties of a vision. So business leaders have tried to come up with properties of a vision. Usually clear and compelling are among the top 5.
Yeah.
There's others. The science, when they talk about, well, what exactly are you sharing? What's in your model? They're interested in, if you're going to describe a future state that we'll all keep in our head, they have this idea of the content or completeness. What did you put into the model and what did you leave out? And that's one of the things I'm interested in, which is when I'm interviewing people, that's what I'm trying to get today. When you think of your game, what are you thinking about? And I'm trying to figure out what you put in the box. So when I think of games, I think of this, and this. And I'm very interested in doing that.
Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The Advantage, where he talks about the difference between, and we've referenced it a lot, the science and the heart side of organizations. And the science side is what you can measure, and people tend to lock in and focus on that. But there's things that are very difficult or perhaps even impossible to measure, right? If you ask a team, how aligned are they to the culture? Yeah. Or, in this case, how aligned are they to the vision, right?
Exactly that.
They can self-report that, but you have no idea if it's right. It's very difficult to tell. Even as the game is being built, you don't know, because there's constant reimagining of all the visions for everybody involved. Two things came up for me while you were talking about that. One, I think probably more on point, when I was a producer on a team making a map, there was a description. We sort of had an idea of what we wanted the map to be. And while we were talking through it, someone on the team expressed like, hey, I want the map. And they described this sort of dark, scary, sharp place, like beautiful, but scary and dark and sharp. Mm-hmm. And it was really cool that they said that out loud and that they were thinking that way, because we were immediately able to say, no, even though we've talked about this a bunch, that's not what we're going for. Yes, there will be perhaps a touch of grit, but we actually want this light and lighthearted. This isn't sharp and dark. It is more bright and appealing and interesting and fantastic in the fantasy sense of that word. And that was, I'll say this without knowing your model, I would say that to this point, when vision has come out well for the teams I've interacted with, it's almost always not because the vision was right up front, but because the leaders who were aligned on the vision, assuming that was true, consistently were in conversation and correcting the places where people went the wrong way. So they were able to spot when it went off course and go, wait a minute, what happened? Okay, you're thinking something different. Let's talk about that. Let's get realigned. But it's a very costly process in some sense. However, I don't know a real good alternative to that, like you were talking about, that gap between step 2 and step 3 of the sort of signal to noise of, did you actually get what I was saying, and how much of it did you interpret differently? And the second thing I thought of was I was talking with, and this was just as a player, I was playing Elden Ring with some other people, because I mostly play like co-op experiences these days, because I'm old and I have 2 small children and just don't have time for much. But anyway, so I'm playing Elden Ring, and we're going through. And I remember I was like, this is actually really impressive, because I don't really like Souls games that much. I think they're really impressive. It's just not my style. And we were talking about what it was, and I just said, yeah, it's sort of like an action-based puzzle game. Like, this is not, that's how I kind of view this experience. And I think if you really like solving those puzzles and figuring out that timing, and the person almost got offended at me. And I just had this vision, it seems like this is what they were trying to create, this very time-sensitive action-based puzzle game, right? Where you have to fight an enemy, learn what they do, and then figure out how to counter what they do, and you're endlessly solving the puzzle. The other person in the conversation, I can't remember who it was, but it was a friend of mine, one of the friends of mine that we were playing with, almost got offended at that. And I think it was because they were like, I don't like puzzle games, but I like this game. And I was like, oh no, it's not like, the puzzle game, like you're I don't know, what's one, like The Witness or something like that. That's not what I'm talking about, but I'm just saying the reason this is interesting is the experience of solving. And that you're solving it on multiple levels. You're solving it at what's the puzzle? You're solving it at, can I respond to the puzzle in the right way? And can I do that all inside of this very strict container that this game is built within, right? Can I use my iframes right and do all the right moves at just the right time so that I can move through these fights? And it was fascinating to me, though, to hear, again, that idea of interpretation. They just did not view the game that way. And we kept talking about it, and they sort of like, they can't really like, okay, you weren't saying I like puzzle games, so, we're okay, or something. I can't remember exactly. But it was just interesting, that different frame. And for me, when I thought about what's the vision of a Souls-style game, that's sort of what comes to mind. But even there, between 2 people playing the same game together, you had this massive difference in how we would describe or think about or communicate that. There's
a few things we haven't said yet, which is, like when you were describing Elden Ring, and again, you went to things like genre and, again, things you can see, or it's like one of those, you can point to it. So that's called prototype theory. Prototype theory is basically, if you don't know what I'm describing, I will reference something that you know about. So
the game will be Halo crossed with Candy Crush.
There we go. That's why people are trying to... Exactly. There's lots of problems with prototype theory, but it's commonly used in the game industry. The bit I'm trying to prove in all of this is, I think the reason why teams are not aligned on their vision is they cannot talk about, back to the beginning of this conversation, I said games are about experiences. Most teams I speak to know the stuff that's in the game. They know the features they're building. They can see the Jira board or whatever they're using. They can open it and go, that's stuff we're making. And we all in agreement what that stuff we have to make is. No arguments really there. What they can't do is figure out why that stuff is there. What's the game? What is the prioritization of each? What is it? What is all this stuff coming together to make? And so, again, I've just finished interviewing game developers to understand their mental models. And I went into this research thinking, I bet it's called a proposition. I propose that you will not be able to describe the player experience of any game. And that's my research going in. And I think what will happen is you will either use conceptual language, we're making a unique, engaging, exciting experience, whatever. Or you will jump to features, something concrete, which has skill trees, progression, puzzles, fighting. And I think there's a bit in the middle, which is by far the most interesting bit, because that's why we play games, called the experience. And I'm thinking, none of you will talk about that. Guess what nobody talked about? Have a guess.
The middle.
Oh, I've spoiled the fun. Nobody could do it and did do it. Not one. Here's what's interesting about that. It's not just the people I talk to, right? Because I'd seen this in the industry. I had to see something that allowed me to go in with that reference, right? I'm going in thinking, I think I see the problem. Now I need the research to prove it. It's not just the people I interviewed again. If that idea was good enough and out there, they would have latched onto it and brought it in. It would be in the industry hanging around. Like, here's how we do it. So it's not just those people or those companies, because if they were in a company and that idea was floating around, they would have latched onto it and said, here's how we solve division alignment. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's in their company, any other companies. And I went all around the world for my interviews. So it's pretty much not in the industry. Again, back to the slider thing I said at the beginning, I'm not sure how far I'm going to push this, right? I could be very safe and say, I've designed a tool that proves if a team is aligned or not. Job done. Nice chatting to you, Ben. Let's go home. Safe, that's what it does. I've done it 70 times, that workshop. But I think it's a bigger problem than that. What I'm kind of saying is, as an industry, back to this changes 3 steps and why do we have so much flux? Mm-hmm. As an industry, not just the people I talk to, I think as a design problem, as a business problem, as a stability studio problem, this solution is not an industry at all, not just the people I'm talking to. Because I think it would have stuck somewhere along the line and would be used, or a variation of it would be used, or something like that. And I can't find it.
So when I hear that, I'm going to just reflect this back to you. You look at vision and you see, you ask about vision and you get questions that are or answers that are at a functional level. This is the stuff that we're making. Or you get answers that are at a conceptual level. And both of those are real parts of games, right? I would describe Halo as a unique, fun, really cool game. That's a conceptual description of Halo. It's not particularly helpful. I could describe a lot of games that way. But you're right. We see that language often in pitch decks and when people are thinking about, well, what's the game? Well, it's going to be engaging. Okay, all right, I'll go find all the people that are trying to make the unengaging games.
Exactly.
And see what they're doing, right? And then, or it's going to be this crossed with this, because it seems like the prototypes theory is similar to the functional. It's like, hey, there's this thing to compare it to. And so I'm comparing it, and again, you'll see this a lot. Like a game will drop and people are like, oh, it's going to be a Tarkov like this, but I'm adding this new thing, right? Or whatever. Or Tarkov crossed with, I don't know, Homeworld. Yeah, try to figure that one out. And again, one of the things I've always thought whenever people make those descriptions is that doesn't tell me anything, because I don't know how much of which elements and again, even if I did, I would only know about the elements. And so you're saying, so we've got this functional layer people like to talk about, we've got this conceptual layer that people like to talk about, and in the middle there's an experiential layer. And here you're calling out not just that there's an experiential layer that we don't talk about, it's that we don't know how to talk about it. We don't have words for it. It is an unsolved part of game development, is the experience layer.
It is. There are solutions out there. This is the thing that's also a bit surprising. There are ways of solving that problem. I did not invent a solution to that problem. I took it from somewhere else, another bit of science, right? So I am not claiming for a second, just to be very clear, that I invented something new. The novelty or the invention is saying it's the joining together of the different bits to produce a solution, to produce a model that says, if you think about it this way, this will help you make sense of the game and then get sense giving, tell others about what you're making. Basically, it'll help solve the vision problem. Simultaneously, it solves the problem with business and creative, because it's the same, in my model, it's the same thing. If you know what game you're making, it explains where it sits in the market. As you say, if we're making Tarkov with Homeworld, I was like, well, why exactly is that different? You haven't explained why it's different. You haven't, but with this model, you could. It would explain, well, here's Tarkov, and here's Homeworld, and here's my hybrid, and here's how the experience is different in each case. That model would explain that exactly. But in the workshop, that's what I'm explaining. I basically go in and say, I don't think you'll have any problems aligning on the art style for your game or the features for your game or the audio, or I think you'll do that stuff because you can point to it and go, do we want that or that? We want that. That's not your problem. I think the problem you're all having is describing the experience those features deliver. And I think none of you can talk about that. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying is each of you have made sense of that, this sense making, right? Each of you have interpreted these features. You've looked at the feature set you're making and gone, okay, I think the game being made is this. And I think because, again, they cannot communicate it, they can't articulate it, it's not communicated. And so they just internalize it and go, well, I think we're doing this. In some cases, the worst scenario is the first time they see where it's gone off track is the game is built, right? We're now 2 years into production or a year or whatever, and they go, oh, you interpreted it that way? That's not what we're making. Yeah, but we've spent 10 million now, so maybe we'll just leave it. And
there's a little training module me and Aaron, or I and Aaron built some number of years ago. It was called Vision and Stuff. Was sort of our basic for value versus stuff. I think value versus stuff.
Okay.
And it was this idea of so many people get so oriented to and start becoming obsessed with, and when things start getting rushed and pressure starts coming in, and we all feel like we've got to move, the place we all go isn't, man, what we really need to move on is making sure we share a picture of what we're creating. Instead, our default is to look at our expertise and go, what I need to do is activate my expertise because we're in a hurry now and we're rushing. And so if I'm a character artist, I need to make a lot of characters and a lot of textures on those characters. Mm-hmm. And if I'm a rigger, I need to rig a lot of things. And if I'm, if I can't rig them, I'm going to be like, I'm blocked. I can't rig everybody. And if I'm, a programmer, I've got to write a lot of code and I've got to complete a lot of features. And if I'm a narrative, I got to write a lot of, and it's like, I got to do stuff.
And the science would support that. So
that's what happens.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. When people are under stress, usually for some external event, like money's being pulled or you have to pivot or something. Like I don't do a lot of research on decision making, but it links into vision, obviously, you'd imagine. So I've read some of it, and they were saying when people are under pressure, they do not make sense of the current situation. So instead of looking at the data and trying to figure out, where are we? Let's make sense of this picture as best we can. What they tend to do is default on the old behaviors. And by the way, those old behaviors are probably not going to get you out of this situation.
Yeah.
But that's what tends to happen. So you're in a bad place and you get worse. All those problems you just said and summarized would come out in the research when I'm asking people, not only the people I interview, but when I do the workshop and it says, well, let's align on the player experience. It's a 4-hour workshop. And I would say no one's really got to the end in terms of being 100% realigned. We run out of time. That's the problem. In other words, There's so much discussion happening to fix the problem. That's like we need another session or we need to, leave it with homework. You have to go and do it. If they were all aligned, we'd be going in because the questions, it's 5 questions that I ask in a specific structure. So it's a mental model decomposer. It decomposes what's in your head in a specific way. If you were completely aligned as a team, we'd be done in 30 minutes. We'd be, here's the 5 questions. Each of them takes 2 or 3 minutes. I would step you through. We'd compare the results and go, well, guys, look pretty good. Let's go home. It hasn't happened. Everyone gets the results and goes, oh, what's up? What's going on there? That's interesting.
Did you expect it to when you started? Did you expect there to be some of that or any of that?
I didn't know what would happen. I think the research I did before it suggested they should be misaligned. Mm-hmm. So even before I had my solution, I would say this is probably a problem for you because I'd seen it so much in my other role, visiting the game studios for over a decade. Was this come up in every studio in some variation,
Yeah.
So I knew it was a problem. What I didn't know was trying to see the problem, trying to get the invisible visible, which is why would a leader even tell me, I think we're good at that? When 20 minutes before it's been speaking to his staff and they're like, we have no idea what the game is. So maybe we're getting into other psychological issues like the identity of the leader, which is I cannot possibly admit that I might be wrong. So when this guy asks me, are you aligned? The easiest thing for me to do is just to tell him we're aligned and get him to go away. Mm-hmm. But he probably knows as well, we're definitely not aligned. He must feel that. Because if I'm speaking to the staff and they're like, we're definitely...
I don't know. Confirmation bias is pretty strong out there.
So I think going in, I didn't know exactly how... I didn't know what the results would be. But again, no team's been aligned. Going down to teams of 2, they've been misaligned as well. So
Well,
this idea that
smaller team is easier, or they're more like it's okay when we're only 2 or 5 people.
Yeah, so that's a myth.
Then we've got it all together.
Lots of people told me that, and I've repeated this experiment many times with teams of 2, 3, 4, 5. The maximum I could have in the workshop is a team of, say, 20. And those 20 would be a sample from across, say, a team of 200.
Yeah.
So if it's a team of 200, obviously we can't talk about a team of 200 people. So we take a sample of 20-ish, usually the leads of each department, to see if the leads are aligning at least, right?
Yeah.
So that's one way it's been done, but all the way down to teams of 2, 3, 4, 5. In some cases, there was a team of 3 and 2 guys sat beside each other for 10 years, and they only make strategy games. This studio only makes strategy games. And until I come in and I asked them, there's a lot of talk about language, right? How you define language. So I said they were misaligned on the results. And it turned out they were misaligned on what the word strategy meant. But they never knew, somehow, even though they sat beside each other for 10 years, until someone like me come in and ask a really simple question. What exactly are you interpreting from that word in this context? For you, the context being their game, obviously. And then they realized we are not interpreting the same way, and that's leading to variation.
Okay, so you have not seen any studio aligned of any size.
No.
You've done this enough times to say you have a decent sample. We would say that the likelihood, there may be one out there, but more odds seem greater that there's not.
It's yet. Yeah.
So how? I don't. Here, I ask you to speculate. We're cranking that meter up again.
Do it.
Good games are made. I would talk about Elden Ring.
So here's put pause there for a second.
Yeah.
I've heard this argument a lot, obviously, right?
Yeah.
That's focusing on the output.
Mm-hmm.
But I would encourage us here to have a double bottom line, let's say. Like one measure we can have is, was the game good? Mm-hmm. Obviously, we've had good games. GTAs, Elden Ring, Helldivers, Baldur's Gate, insert your game of choice. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The other bottom line is, how happy were the people and what was the development process like that made that game? Because I know, I'm sure you do too, plenty of examples where the game has been good, let's call it good, but the process has been horrific and nobody wants to repeat that process. It wasn't worth it. It was not worth it. You have people crying in the car park, mental health, people on leave, daily friction. So I would encourage, what I'm trying to advocate is, when I did my earlier developer interviews at the start of the year, a separate set of interviews, I asked about problems in vision management. Not mental models, just vision management. How does your studio? Those 3 things I mentioned at the beginning. How do you capture, communicate, and measure vision? And I interviewed developers just on those 3 questions. So 3 main themes, right? A 4th theme emerged that I did not ask about. It wasn't on my topic guide. But it came out in the thematic analysis, how you analyze this stuff. And that 4th theme I ended up calling psychology of work, which is, although I asked about very clinical, technical things, how do you capture, communicate, and measure vision? Everybody ended up talking about the psychology of work. Friction, tension, lack of feeling creative, all the negative forces that we feel because of the development process. So do we have good games? We do have good games, but that's only one measure. I'm saying because of the lack of vision, and I've already hinted that can impact creativity too, but it's more this bad friction. Before someone says we can have good friction, I know some friction is good. I get it.
Some
but
is
this
bad.
is not. This is not the good variation. Just to be clear, this is the bad version, right? So you can have good games that come out of, some of them are sequels or well-proven tropes, and you're making a few changes. And there's also been lots of sequels where they've been really horrific, where they should have had really simple development processes. So there's no clear path. This is messy. It's not like we're making a sequel. The path is clear. It's just a matter of putting the bits in the machine and we make the machine. There's studios that couldn't do that. Those stories are out there. So I just encourage us not to think about, we do have good games, but let's not talk about survivor bias here, right? Which is,
right.
What about all the failures we mentioned, all the games that got cancelled, and all the people who had to move across the country? And
there's an interesting, an example that comes to mind for me. Bungie, way back in the day, was famous for the epic amounts of crunch and the difficulty in the development process. right? Even back like the original Halo, like you read some of the stories, and it was back at the old school, just pure crunch for months on end type of thing, and yet Halo came out the other side, and so like you said, there's a survivor bias, and we go, oh, they must be good at making games, right? I see that a lot. But they've replicated that. Like Destiny was also a good game. The Halo sequels were a good game, although that's a little bit. Making a sequel is a different thing. But they've done a good job over time. And I think as you're talking about this, a thought that's coming to mind for me is, if Halo was a good game despite that development, what was possible? Yeah. And I think like maybe that's it for all the games you mentioned: Helldivers, Baldur's Gate, like Civilization games. These famous games. What is the potential that we're losing because vision isn't there? And so, and I think I still have the question of the fact that a cohesive game came out the other side. Is that in your mind that like, well, what ended up happening is just somebody who was aligned inside themselves had the authority to basically force that? Like,
this can definitely
what's
happen.
going on there?
Yeah, there are those examples. You've got a strong vision holder, and they're so excited. And so this is why it's called alignment and not agreement. Vision alignment check. It's not agreement, right? And the difference, as I point out at the start of all the workshops I do, is alignment means if it was my money in my game, I probably wouldn't do that. I'd make something else. But I'm excited by your journey, and I will go with you. That's alignment, right? Sometimes you can create an aligned team. You can build those teams. And the Halo one you did, I don't know much about them, by the way, so I'm speculating here, but why did they produce this? Why did they produce a success next? Maybe the team were together for a long enough time. There's a whole thing we haven't talked about here. Vision, it's called... this could be a long conversation. When you do the research on shared mental models, right, everything we've talked about comes under the banner. It's called task work. Task work is a real heading to the same goal, the same task, right? There's another area. There's two main branches of vision, or shared mental models. It's called teamwork. And basically all the science would say the longer the team stays together, the better we know each other, the better we get at performing together. So those examples in particular that you mentioned, such as maybe Baldur's Gate or Helldivers or Halo and Destiny, one of the arguments may be, if we're to speculate, is because those teams, I think, from what I know, were together for a long period of time, they had very high teamwork. They knew each other. They knew each other, what they were capable of. So when they were making the game, they were looking out for each other. I need to tell Bob about this. Bob works on this thing. I know Bob. I've worked with him for 10 years. That's teamwork, right? It's a whole branch of... So teamwork and task work together are meant to make a successful team. So those teams, if you can manage to get the team to stay together and you know each other, that does make, it increases your chance of making a successful game, essentially.
Right. You're loading the die a little bit.
You're stacking the odds in your favor if you know each other and you know how you work. There's some people who have been together and they don't know each other at all, professionally. Sure, yeah. I don't mean knowing your dog's name. I'm not talking about that. I mean, do you understand what job they do and their function, what information they need at what time, and things like that, really. But so I think that there are teams who can do it. You can have.
Do you know what? You know what else I've seen too? I'm thinking back. There was a time where it was an almost 100-page game design doc, and it was supposed to solve this problem. It was like, this is the vision doc, 100 pages long, and there's just all this, like, here's all the systems. What was interesting is, again, like I was talking about with the audience, the person who like goes in and they're like, okay, I'm not going to do the simple thing. I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm going to go detail. And they were just going, and there was all this detail, and they were trying to document everything so that there couldn't be any confusion. But the reality was, the more they documented, the more misinterpretation was possible. And just at smaller and smaller levels, right? And so, but one, I could misinterpret the big thing, but two, I could misinterpret every little subcomponent that you've already said is going to be a part of this. And I think, again, that's where those people become so frustrated. I've seen that, and I feel for them, right? Because they're trying to, you said sense making and sense giving. They're trying to sense give.
They are,
right?
And it's frustrating.
They really
Why aren't they getting it?
Why aren't they getting it? Yeah, and so I'll go more detail. I'll go different detail. Oh, okay. I'll flesh out this part. And like you said, one of the things I say is this is what my belief of why work systems exist is because if if we all lived in a perfect world where everybody just knew exactly what they needed to do and could just go do it, we wouldn't need people like me. I'm a producer. Everybody would just go do their work. They wouldn't need Jira or any sort of work system or meetings. They would just all walk in. They'd be like, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing my work. I go home. I come in the next day. I do my work. But the reality is we don't live there. We have to achieve alignment. And then I say alignment is in a constant state of entropy. And so as it decays, you need to push back against that. And the thing is, you can't ask for perfect alignment because it's not possible, because I can't take what's in my mind and put it in your mind. And even if I did, your mind's different from mine, so you even wouldn't hear it the same then. And so what we end up doing is, like the thing I say a work system is designed to do, is to get most of the people going mostly the right direction most of the time. And if we can, and you get to define what most is, but the higher you make the number, the higher percentage you make it, the more time you have to spend trying to maintain that. I think
that's an important point. Like the start of the workshop, it's not like we're trying to create 100% alignment. It's not that. It's saying, can we make you more aligned than today? What that number is, what does it matter if it's 1% or 100 or N? Who cares, right?
Right.
We're going to show you the variation in your thought as it is today on this game. And then we're going to talk about it in a structured way to make you align on one single version that we all agree on. You should be in a better state than when you leave. There's no need to quantify it. That's the direction you're going in. Are you all aligned? Having a map is better than 10 maps or 20 maps or 100 maps. One map that we're all taking the game over here. We can't guarantee that game will perform well in the market. We're not saying, it's going to be $1 billion hit. That's a whole separate question, which is the idea any good? That's not what we're saying. It's more, do you believe this unique combination of features you want to bring into existence, that's worth and interesting for the player? Yeah, we believe that's interesting for the player. Right. As long as there's no variation, and we're all going to make that thing, that's the bet. That's the risk. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
And that's the thing they're struggling.
Okay, I'm going to pause this here for this episode. This will be continued in the future, but there's already so much to chew on. I want to wrap up right now and summarize what we've covered so far. Okay, if your vision isn't clear, isn't shared, or isn't good, you're in trouble. This is our first summarized point. It's also the number one problem game studios face. Second, there is often a difference between the publisher's business vision and the game's creative vision. This leads to low stability and a lot of chaos in our industry. Third, your vision needs to be about the experience. It needs to capture the intangible feelings you are looking to create. Fourth, too many studios are stuck at the high conceptual or prototype theory level of your game, where it's engaging, unique, compelling, or perhaps it's like other games or genres like Dark Souls crossed with Lord of the Rings. Or, on the other end, they jump to feature sets and what they're building. You need the middle experiential feels layer in your vision. What is the player experiencing? Fifth, when we're under pressure, we tend to default to our expertise to get us out. It keeps us from looking at the big picture. We get stuck thinking about work rather than why we're doing that work. Sixth, don't get stuck thinking that because you made a good game, you did this well. The process was often a complete mess, and what you did may not be repeatable at all. We've seen this across our industry time and time again. Seventh, agreement and alignment are two different things. You don't need to all agree to be aligned within a studio. Eighth, teamwork is an important element of team success, and having a team working together for a long time and learning about each other can stack the odds in your favor in game dev. All right, that wraps us up for this one. Thank you all so much for listening. We will be talking with Graham McAllister again soon. Thank you. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did and are looking for more conversations like this one, join the Building Better Games Discord community. It's for leaders and producers in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems and who want to share experiences and learn how to lead and build better games. Check out the show notes to join. I'll see you there.